Get ready for the world's greatest Arsenal podcast. Welcome to another podcast by Guns and Yellow Ribbons. Enjoy the show.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Guns and Yellow Ribbons. My name is Fergus, I'm your host. I'm joined by Old Man Trev and Mark and Andy from Arsenal History. Following our podcast that we done the other week, we thought it'd be good to take little sections of Arsenal history and look at it. And this one is looking at Woolwich and Plumstead in that area, the move over to Highbury. So basically from 1886 to 1925. First of all, welcome back, Mark and Andy. How are you doing, Mark? You first. And did you enjoy the other week when we done this?
I enjoyed it hugely. Yes, it was great fun. Thank you. Yes, and hello to you, chaps.
Hello, mate. Andy, a face for radio. Apparently, isn't that what they were saying on Twitter? I don't listen to them.
That's what I said. Yeah,
that's what he said. Yeah.
Good evening, chaps.
Evening, mate. I hope you did enjoy it, and hopefully we're going to keep this one a little bit shorter. We're going to try and keep it to 45 minutes. Remember, you can check out a lot of the stuff on the guys' website, which is thearsenalhistory.com, and you can also check at our website. We've got a few little bits and pieces, but not a huge amount on there yet, but we are hoping to put more on, which is gunsandYellowribbons.com. So, starting in, well, Mark, this as we had a little chat beforehand, this is sort of your era and your speciality is the Woolwich side of Arsenal. So we spent an awful lot of time in Woolwich, Plumstead Common, Marshes, the Sports Ground, the Manor Field, which later became the Manor Ground, went to the Invicta Ground for 3 years, and then back to the Manor Ground, which we spent almost 20 years south of the river. So, you know, all that moving around, I know you've put some, you've done some work in some of your books over that. Tell us a little about that time and that era and the emergence of Arsenal Football Club. And ultimately, we'll get to the point where, why did we move? But that's a few minutes down the line, at least. I'll leave it over to you, Mark.
Okay. Well, as Andy said last week before, the club was basically founded out of the Dale Square Cricket Club. They were playing had a few games, and then in the summer they thought, end of the summer they thought let's play a bit of football. David Stanskin was instrumental in this, as was Elijah Watkins, who was the Dale Square Cricket secretary. They got things together. Stanskin bought got football together with the chaps. They had a bit of a kickabout. Played their first game in Millwall against Eastern Wanderers. Brought along Fred Beardsley for the journey, and then they expanded from there. Basically, I mean, it's when you look at the papers, it's actually quite a simple sort of formation, but it's never really been looked at properly because a lot of the original stories said Danskin didn't like cricket, but he loved it. He played it all the time. In fact, his last game for Royal Arsenal was for Royal Arsenal Cricket Club in 1890. Or 91. So there was so much, and the club evolved so much in that time. They went from 1886 being unknown to 1890, again as Andy alluded to last time, to being like the champions of the South. Okay, they were given that name by one of the local papers, but they genuinely were. They won every trophy. Other than the London Senior Cup, which they then won in 1891, then they became professional. It was really just like a tale of it just took off.
Trevor, you were keen on this era as well. Obviously, it's closer to your age group as well, so we would expect that. So. Sorry, I had to get that in. Take yourself off mute, old man.
Oh, Lord. He does it to me on purpose. He mutes me, and then he blames me.
I can't.
Fergus, I've got a pen handy here because we've both got loads in our head, you and me, and I'm going to mark down how many times we get put right by these two boys of superior knowledge tonight. I'm a little bit worried. But yeah, so we as you say, Mark, we start off in 1886. We play our first game against Eastern Wanderers. And in a relatively short space of time, in 1890, we're kings of the South, 4 years. So there's a massive development there. And we start off at the Manor Ground. What's the Manor Ground like in them early days, boys?
Pretty basic, really. Depends. The Manor Field, which became the Manor Ground, the Manor Field literally was a field. The Manor Ground, they basically put wagons and whatnots around it. Then they started putting what's the word for it, stands in. But it took a long time. It evolved over a long time.
The main development of the Manor Ground, that comes after we've spent the short time at the Invicta Ground, is it? We moved back there, and the 20 years we spend there after that, that's when it starts getting developed, is it? Is that what happens?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we moved on to the Manor Field first because we've been playing at the Sportsman Ground, which was a little bit closer to the Thames, and it flooded one day when they were due to play. It was actually their last home game of that season, and so they went a few fields along and asked the owners of that field if they could play there that game, and that was what was known as the Manor Field. And then the following season, they started playing there on a permanent basis, and that was, it was, as Mark says, just a field. And they had 2 years there. When then we moved to the Invicta Ground, which was a purpose-built football ground, and it's probably one of the best grounds, if not in the south, or not in the whole country, but certainly in the south of the country. It was.
And there's still parts of it left today, isn't it? This is in somebody's back garden.
Yeah,
the terraces.
Yeah,
I've seen pictures of you both on it many moons ago. I think that is, isn't it?
To give you an idea of how quickly we rose, so as you say, from 1886 we started. 1890-91, the Football League that was the third season of the Football League. We were getting crowds that were comparable to the Football League, which there was a well-organised competition, and it had all the biggest clubs in the country. Well, they were all based in the North and the Midlands, but we were getting crowds that that the Football League clubs would have been happy to get, and no one else in the south of the country could command such crowds. And we were then able to also invite the big teams to come down and play. The only way you could do that was if you offered them a nice big fee for coming down. And they used to come down because we knew that we could get a big crowd in to come and see them, to pay for it.
Okay.
Who said football wasn't all about money, eh?
It always was.
Always has been.
If it's the first purpose-built ground, the Invicta Ground, and it's a good ground and it's attracting clubs and from up north and fans, why are we only there 3 years then, boys? What happens?
Well, if you think that what happened with Kroenke and Usmanov, from 2007 onwards was quite interesting, we had something similar happen towards the end of our time there. The last season there was so Arsenal they weren't a limited company at the time. They didn't have a board of directors and owners. They had a committee, and the people who made up the club were members, just ordinary members, and ordinary members then elected a committee. And there were a couple of people on the committee who got into bed with the owner of the Invicta Ground, George Weaver, and what they tried to do was take over the club. And so you may have read stories about the last season that they were there, the owner of the Invicta Ground, their landlord, tried to put the rent up, sort of an astronomical amount of money. And he did that to try to force the members and the committee to move away from the club so that he could take over the club. But it failed, and the men that had sort of kept the club, or started the club and kept it going over the first 5 years, decided that they didn't want to stay at the Invicta Ground because of what George Weaver and his cohorts were trying to do. And we moved away from there back to the Manor Field, and we had to form a limited company. What was the limited company for, Mark? Was that to develop the Manor Field, wasn't it?
No, that was.
Or was it to buy the mortgage for it?
It was to buy the mortgage for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So we had to issue shares and become a limited company, and that's why we changed our name, because they couldn't continue as Royal Arsenal, which was a name that they weren't allowed to. They weren't allowed to use the word Royal, so they formed Woolwich Arsenal instead.
Okay. One thing, slightly off the topic, but in the era, you mentioned a lot of the time about the men and the men that got to the football, and football and sport is very much associated with men back then. And I just read when I was looking up some stuff today that men were charged like something like this before we went professional. It went up when we went professional slightly, but 3p to get in, and boys were charged 2p, but women got in for free. And that also transferred when we went professional and moved back to the Manor Ground. Was that normal? Does anybody know if many women went to football back then? Mark, do you know?
Yes, and if you were to read the Royal Arsenal, you would see there's a whole section on the crowd, and also in my other book, the crowd at Woolwich Arsenal, which is a bit earlier. And it goes through how many women went to the game. I mean, we found they think about 40% of the crowd was women. In the first season at Invicta.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. Because it was a social event. Because as Andy said, it was a lovely ground. It was Woolwich. Woolwich was massive. You know, it was centre of the empire, effectively, in many ways. You know, we were making all the arms for the empire to go around and you know, do whatever. So it was a huge social thing. The problem was that a lot of women didn't then go to the Manor Ground because it wasn't as nice, to be honest. And there's lots of stories of women who did go get their clothes, you know, basically destroyed because it was so mad.
I read probably in your book or an extract of your book. So I read that they had an embankment and then they had some terraces, and they had to be reminded that there weren't seats because when it was inclement, some of the like embankments used to get very muddy, so people would go back into the terraced areas, and the ladies would sit on and ruin their clothes, as you say. So, but was that normal among football of its day? Because I just never associated.
I think so. To be honest, I think it was a social thing.
Okay.
You know, I mean, it would depend on a lot of factors, but I think if people looked at it, I think they'd find that women did go to football a lot more than it's assumed in that period, in the post sort of the late Victorian era. I don't think it was as prevalent in the Edwardian and post First World War, but women still did go. You know, they still did go. Wherever people think there's a blacks game, it was predominantly. If you look at pictures of the crowd in the Manor Ground in the on the Spy and Cop end, you know, you only see 2 or 3 women. But if you look in the stands, and you know, there's evidence in the stands, women were in the stands quite a lot. So yeah, I mean, you know, there was one occasion when one of the Bradford players, I think it was 1910 or 1911, he got banned from playing in the FA Cup because he swore at 2 women whilst he was playing, and they gave him a month ban, and he didn't play in the FA Cup because of it.
Oh wow! Okay. What's when you look at the Manor Ground and the Invicta is probably to a certain degree, what sort of attendances would you have expected to get there, Andy? Like the average attendance, and you know, and how successful were we in that stadium?
So in the Invicta, I think the highest attendance we got was about 10,000, and in our last season there, the average was between 6,000 and 7,000, which, like I say, was the average crowd for a football league game. The early days in the Manor Ground, when we moved back there, they were probably a little bit lower because it wasn't as well developed. But over years, you know, it was developed bit by bit. They put in stands and increased the terracing. Mark mentioned the word Spy and Cop there. You know, we were the first club to have a terrace called the Cop. And you know, as you've seen, I don't know if you've seen pictures of it, but it does go back quite a way. So by the time we got into the first division in 1904, yeah, it could easily hold 40,000 people. But we were getting, you know, we were getting crowds once we got promoted into the first division of 30, 35,000.
At the Manor Ground.
At the Manor Ground, yeah.
Yeah.
But throughout from 1893 up to about 1900, the crowds weren't that great. Mainly because we started off in the second division, although you know, it was good that we could pull in people from outside of the area to come in and see football league games. Plumstead wasn't an easy place to get to anyway. And then towards the end of the 19th century, we were at war in the Boer War, And so a lot of the partisan fans from the local area worked in the Arsenal, and they were forced into working overtime on a Saturday afternoon. So the crowd slumped where the local fans weren't actually able to go because they were made to work, and that some of them working nights as well. So that affected early attendances. But as we came out of the Bar War, it helped us, and the crowds picked up.
Trev, you were going to ask something there a second ago. Go on.
Yeah, no, I was just before. I'm conscious that Fergus wants to keep this to a certain length of time tonight, so I want to ask one question. Then I want to move on and ask you boys about when the decline set in, about 1907, 1908, and the decline started on the field and the crowds dropped. But just so people know, I mean, we've spoken about it. Is what's left of the Invicta Ground and the Manor Ground, boys? Anything left of them?
The Invicta, as you've seen, Fergus put up the terracing.
Yeah.
Which I think was the Conway Road. That was behind one of the goals. And that goes, how long do you reckon, Andy? 50 yards?
50 yards, yeah.
Because it goes to the church as well, doesn't it?
10 houses, isn't it?
Yeah, 10 houses, but there's a church butting it, and I think it goes into the church as well. I think someone's said that. So that goes through about 10 houses, and then there's a church, and it goes all the way along. So it's quite there's quite a length left. Manor Ground, nothing.
Is there any preservation on? Is there any preservation on this terracing then, or anything like that now?
No idea. Wouldn't have thought so.
No.
I mean, it's
in the back of people's gardens. You look the other picture that you put up earlier, Fergus. That shows it's quite deteriorated. That end of it.
I'll get that up in a second. Just give me 1 second. I took it off because I thought we'd moved on from there. Come up in 1 second. There we go. So yeah.
And that was taken in 1970 odd, because that was a story in the Kentish Independent about Arsenal in 71 getting to the final, FA Cup final.
Oh, and that was a background story to do with the final and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So that you can see that's what it looked like, in the early 70s, late 60s.
And not only just that, Mark just said that the Manor Ground, there's nothing left of it anymore. It got developed and it's being redeveloped again. But also, when the club moved from Plumstead up to Highbury, they left virtually everything there, which is a nightmare for us as historians, because we've got no early records to go through. The club left it all there.
Yes, nothing.
It's all lost.
Oh, blimey.
All the paper records, you mean, and photos?
Yeah, nothing.
Yeah.
There's absolutely nothing.
They left it there. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So where do you get your information from then to substantiate the information that you've got so far for that era then?
Anyway, newspapers, basically.
There's also some early programs knocking around. The club have got some, and some of the serious program collectors have got some. So we've had access to them. Some of them are in the newspaper library as well.
Okay, like what you were talking about the last time. Yeah, no, that's fine.
Yeah.
So Trev then wanted to talk about the decline and then ultimately leaving the Manor Ground, and look, I suppose how the residents of Plumstead would have felt about that. Mark, again, because it's your manor, as they say, being in the Woolwich area. What about the decline and leaving the last few games at the Manor Ground, and how did the locals feel about it?
They were very, very, very unhappy. And I think from memory, there was an article, and I think, yeah, that's right. Norris wasn't invited. They had a do to basically say, yeah, everyone's been all upset we're going, but we're have a big piss up. And Norris, I mean, the other one, I mean, the other people were invited. Hall was invited, Humble was invited, but Norris wasn't invited. He wasn't a very well liked man, because he did what he said he was going to do. He took over into 1910. And again, as Andy said last time, George Levy said you can't move. George Levy in 1912 had enough, so year later, oh, George Levy's gone. Let's go. Let's move. And that's what they did. But to be fair to them, they had to do something because, there's no way they could have sustained the level of crowds and everything else that they were getting at that point, 19 again. And also, they'd gone down a division because they were playing so poorly.
Okay. And you said the locals weren't happy. What did it do? Did they take to the streets, take banners?
No, just didn't turn up. No, because they realised what was going to happen. They knew what was going to happen. They were told what was going to happen in 1910. So if you don't turn up, then we're going to leave. And they just sort of lost interest, really, I suppose. There's not a lot on it, is there, Andy? Really, there's not a huge amount. I mean, other than to see that, the supporters were very, very irate.
As Mark says, they were resigned to the fact, having known that what Norwich said in 1910. He said he'd keep them there for 2 years as long as the crowds came back, but they didn't. Fergus, is there any chance of you putting up that graph that I sent?
Let me see if I can. Give me a second, and I'll get it.
It's quite explanatory. So from 1904-05, when we got promoted into the top flight, our average crowd was 20,000, which may not sound a lot now, but at the time it was the second highest in the country. And
give me a second. I'll stick it up here.
And then what happened was there was two things that happened. The first was that Chelsea got formed in 1905, and they were immediately elected into the Football League. So all the casual fans that we attracted from all other parts of London that were willing to make that journey down to Plumstead to see all the top names, all of a sudden they didn't need to. They could go to Chelsea, which was a lot easier to get to from central London. And if you look at Chelsea's first season in the league, 2 seasons after joining the league, they got promoted into the top flight. And so their average crowds was well over 30,000, and ours had dropped from 20,000 down to under 15,000. So that was the first thing that happened. And then Tottenham got elected into the league as well. And although they're not in London, their ground was a bit more accessible. It's a slightly easier train journey from Liverpool Street up to their ground. And then they got promoted into the top flight as well. So if you look at 1909-10, Chelsea's had dropped down again, but they were both between 25 and 30,000, their average crowd, and ours had dropped down to just over 10,000. Our crowd had dropped by 50%. And back then, two main sources of income were gate receipts and transfers. So our gate receipts had dropped by 50%, and all of a sudden we'd gone from making a profit to making a loss. And the only way that they could mitigate that loss was to start selling players. And so all the big names that we bought and the players that we'd made, they started to be sold. And that was the only way. I don't think it's going to show up. You can probably get the gist of it. So the red line is Arsenal's attendances, the blue line is Chelsea, and the grey line is Tottenham.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you can see ours has halved, and Chelsea's has gone from nothing. And so by 1910, ours was just over 11,000, and that's when Norris said, "Look, if you keep coming to the games and paying for it, paying for the club to stay here, we'll stay here." And the crowd didn't really it increased a little bit, but it wasn't enough. The break-even figure was probably over 15,000. And then 1912-13, it started off badly, and it got worse and worse and worse. The last few games that we played at the Manor Ground, we were getting crowds of 5,000, 4,000, and the very last game, only 3,000 turned up. They'd given up by then.
So Andy, by the time we get to 1913, we're rock bottom from a playing perspective. We win 3 games all season, 12-13.
Yeah.
And then so is that because Chelsea and Tottenham are stealing the best players, or is that part of Norris's plan to make it more desirable for us to move away from the Woolwich area? I genuinely asking those questions because I don't know, mate. So I'm not digging there. it's just interesting to know why the main cause in you guys' minds of why in 1913, what was a very successful club, wins 3 games all season.
It's a good question.
Chelsea and Tottenham were just as bad as us at the time. They barely escaped relegation. But the thing is, people would still go there to see the big names from all over the country. As you say, our season 12-13 was very poor. It started off badly, and they just never recovered from it. We lost one player in 1912, Andy Duckett, who was probably the last of the star players of the era, and that may well have been the decline for that season. But Norris, to say that Norris wanted that, I'm not really sure, because just after Christmas, he could see that things were in really bad condition, a really bad state. So he actually bought some players. He must have put his hand in his pocket, and we bought 4 players for around about £1,000 each, and that was our record fee at the time. So he's the manager has obviously gone to him and said, "Look, can we get some new blood in?" And he allowed him to do that, and they just weren't enough to stop the rot.
Yeah. So in 1913, we moved to Highbury, despite looking at sites in Battersea, Haringey. Norris settled for a plot in North London. We settled for Highbury. We paid 20 grand, I think, for a 21-year lease on a 6-acre plot of land. We had issues with the locals. Part of the deal was we couldn't play on Christmas Day or Good Friday. Talk a little bit about that. Who wants to go on that one then? Mark or Andy? Who wants to go to move to Highbury?
Do that one as well. Been refreshing my memory from earlier on today. So the move to Highbury was announced at the beginning of March, and the Islington Gazette, ran a small story on it, and then the following week there were just like loads and loads of letters from locals, mainly living on Highbury Hill. So there was a guy called Thomas Naylor, seemed to be the main instigator, and there was a local councillor who lived. I think Peter Inglis was his name. He lived on Highbury Hill as well, and they just went absolutely bananas, and they were not happy at all. And they were trying to, they set up the Highbury Defence Committee, as it was called, and they were organising meetings and lobbying the local council. But at the end of the day, there was not a lot they could do, and they really went to town in the way that they described the football fans, hordes. Amassing at Highbury every 2 weeks, and doing all sorts of unspeakable things. But in the end, we saw it through. There was nothing that the council could do to stop us. And not that they wanted to stop us. I think that the council wanted us there, and the local traders definitely wanted us there.
And Highbury Hill residents haven't changed even over 100 years on.
No, very much, yeah.
Trevor, go on.
I spoke briefly, just aimed at you really, Andy, because I spoke to Mark briefly about this before we came on air. This chap, Norris, it really gets my attention. I want to know all about Norris because, it's been said that us Gunners fans of today owe Norris everything, really, whether you agree with that or whether you don't. But going back to moving to Highbury, what I've been told is that there was all those protests, and the way Norris dealt with it was, as you just explained, he explained to the local traders how much money they would earn from all these people coming into North London, and that sort of shut most of the traders up. And then he used his influence with a few councillors and got them on side. That's all I know. But then the really interesting one, and the words I read were that even in those days, his social networking skills were very good indeed, and that he used those to starve the protesters that were left of any publicity by closing down their avenues to the newspapers, because that was all there was in them days. How did that work, mate? Because it really gets my interest.
I'm not really sure that's how it happened. I'll tell you what I think that Norris was a good orator. There's not a great deal in the newspapers about interviews with him, but there are the odd reports on meetings that were held, and from the way that they describe him talking, he sounds like he's one of these people that can stand up in front of the crowd and sort of like tell them and give them a nice view on absolutely everything, and make it all sound nice. This is how it's going to be, and it will work out all right. Yeah.
So he wasn't the bully boy a lot of people think he was then, possibly.
He may well have been behind the scenes, but certainly not his public face.
Because don't forget, he had been the chairman and the director at Fulham since, was it 1904?
1905, yeah.
With William Hull, so they were well versed in football in football circles. So it wasn't just like a bloke turning up, bullying people and getting what he wanted. He had been part of that, and I know he wrote columns in football and sports papers, which but to be honest, I haven't seen many because I don't think many of them survived, or Collindale or whatever. But he wasn't the ogre that he was. I don't think he was the ogre that he was made out to be. He was probably a very difficult bloke, but I don't think he was the overarching Machiavelli that he's made out to be.
Would it be fair? Go on, Trevor. I was just going to say, would it be fair to say?
Just one more thing on this. I'm sorry, my friend. Sorry, Fergus.
That's right.
Because at some stage during this process of moving Arsenal and buying Arsenal, it goes from being Henry Norris, plain old Henry Norris, to being Sir Henry Norris, doesn't he? So he couldn't have been all bad. He must have been worthy of a knighthood somehow or other.
He got that for sending blokes to the trenches. He became a Sir purely, I think it was 1916 or 17, for recruiting people into the army.
Okay,
that was it. Okay. No other reason.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, I was going to say, would it be fair to say, because I know we touched on it briefly before and don't really need to expand hugely, but his ultimate objective, Norris and Hull, the ultimate objective was not necessarily to create Arsenal Football Club, but to create a bigger football club in Fulham and Arsenal. So Arsenal came out as a bit of a mistake from the end of it. Is that a fair assumption, or is that a bad rounding up?
I think he just wanted a first division team. The team that he had at Fulham just couldn't get promoted. He managed to get them into the Football League, but they struggled year in, year out in the second division. And he's brought himself into Arsenal. It's a ready-made first division team. There was talk in the early days about merging Fulham and Arsenal, but I think we covered that at the last one.
Yeah,
they may have talked about it, but they never put that forward to the Football League, possibly moving Arsenal to Fulham, but George Levy wouldn't let that happen. So he's brought into a ready-made first division team, and that's what he wanted. Sort of like the kudos of owning it, one of the big names in football.
And it's no different than Man City and the rich Arabs and so on of its day, I suppose. This is Highbury.
I think it is, because I think the scale of money is completely and utterly different. I mean, it's a totally different.
Yeah, but football has blown up the wages that the guys would have got, and so on and so forth. But I'm just trying to make maybe a modern day comparison to work it out in my head. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But
I honestly don't think that's a very good. I don't think it's a very good. It's probably a better comparison is with the bloke who ran Man U, the Pie Man.
Okay,
I've got his name now.
Edwards.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. That's a better analysis, I think, of looking at what Norris was. I think the Man City and the Chelsea stuff is just totally different.
It's blown out.
They're out. They're stratospherically different financially.
Norris wasn't there to just plough tons of money into the club. He did, but all that money got paid back to him. He wanted to make a profit out of it. He took a dividend out of the shares each year. He didn't want to make, sort of like loads of profit over and above the money that he put in. He didn't sort of like charge the club interest on that money. But all that money that he loaned them, and it was mainly to build up Highbury so that the club could become self-sustaining, which is a model that they've carried on over the years. Chelsea and Man City, they've got an owner each who have just ploughed billions into the club, and there's no tool to take that money back to them.
On the screen, I've got a picture of Highbury. This is 2 weeks before we go and play Leicester. Is it Leicester Foss?
Yeah.
Is that how you pronounce it? Leicester Foss. And we beat them 2-1 on a 2-1 victory over them on the 6th of September, 1913. Talk to me a bit more about the performances in that stadium. from 1913 through to 1925. What were our attendance like? You know, did we gain many accolades? The stadium itself was designed by Archibald Leach, who had designed, I think, Manchester United and a few other stadiums around the country as well.
Yeah,
so it was,
and the Manor Ground. You've done some work on the Manor Ground. So yeah, the attendances from the off. Don't forget, we're in the second division now, so we've been relegated, and from the off, we're getting attendances well in advance of what we were getting at the last season at the Manor Ground. I think the first game there was 20,000. You'd expect that at the first game of the season, but the ground was unfinished. It was far from finished. You saw that 2 weeks before. They didn't add a great deal onto it after that. The stand that you see there, that was nowhere near finished. It had the support structure, it had the roof on, but it didn't have the wall at the back. And that was just tarpaulins. So certainly for the first few games, there was no one allowed in the stand.
Would that be the location where the east stand or the west stand is?
That's the east stand, yeah. That's the original east stand.
That's the mid-20s, isn't it? That picture.
Yeah.
If not
late
20s.
The Arsenal name written across it.
Yeah.
So we ended up our first season there. Our average crowd was just over about 23,000, whereas the last in Plumstead was below 10,000. You know,
financially, it was a right move.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, totally. Yeah.
Did Norwich use all his own money then to build Highbury? Was it all his own money, or he had some?
Far from it. So him and Hall were 50-50 partners in it. So they each spent the money that they put in was exactly the same. But what they used was the builder. So they said to the builder, "We won't pay you, but what we'll do is we'll pay you a percentage of the gate receipts." And so they basically took out a long-term loan via the builder, and they paid the builder off as each game was played. And that was by far, you know, that the builder took over more than 50% of the liabilities of the cost of the stadium.
Wow.
You know, Norris was quite a shrewd man.
Because they only had 6 months, didn't they? 6 months to turn a field into a stadium, wasn't it?
No, we started in June.
Less than that.
Wow,
yeah.
bloody hell.
Started 10 weeks.
I think they got planning permission in June, and their first game was in early September.
Wow.
Oh, they did a fantastic job to get it finished. It was amazing.
Yeah. Although we had
it wasn't finished, was it? It was still under construction in certain areas.
Yeah. When I say finished, I mean to actually be able to allow the football league to say, you can play a game of football on that.
Yeah. So that, you know, the first season, the main stand wasn't anywhere near complete. It wasn't finished until well into the 1914-15 season. But we had a bit of a problem towards the end of 1913-14 on the West Terrace. So one night, I think it was in April, it had torrential rain, and the rain came down Highbury Hill, and the wall that separated the terrace from the houses that backed onto it, where Mr. Inglis and Mr. Naylor lived, started listing onto the terrace. And so the directors have then got to make a decision. This was to happen the night before they were due to play one of their games in the league, and they couldn't just call the league up and say, "Look, we can't play this game tomorrow," because they were then at risk of losing the points. It's a still thing today. If you cancel a game because you haven't got permission, you forfeit the points to the game. But they did do that. They looked at the health and safety side of things, and they said, "Well, we're gonna cancel the game anyway. We're going to postpone it." And they then spoke to the league and told them what they were doing. And luckily, the league were very understanding, so we didn't actually lose the points to the game. But it took a couple of weeks, and basically what they did was, what had happened was the rain had pushed a load of mud against the wall, and that's what had caused it to list. And they got someone, a builder's firm, to shovel all the mud from one side of the wall onto the other side, and then just try and push it back a bit.
Just keep it upright. So what were you talking about up until maybe Chapman was approached? Because Chapman came about 25, and we don't want to go into Chapman as much, but because we want to do that separately, because I think he's deserved of a 45-minute to an hour conversation at least on his own, if not more. But like, you know, we continue to develop the ground. You said it didn't get finished till, what was it, 17? So they spent 4 or 5 years developing the ground.
Yeah.
The attendances continue to grow.
Results. There was a problem in 1914 in that we declared war on Germany, and so a lot of our support were young men or men of fighting age, and they got shifted off to the front. So come 1914-15, football really should have stopped in 1914, but it didn't, and the attendances plummeted again. So our average attendance dropped to about 14,000. So we've gone from under 10,000 in Plumstead one season, then we've hit the high life in Highbury, about 23,000, and then all of a sudden the war's come and it's hit the attendances again, and there was a lot of bad feeling amongst a lot of the media, certainly, about football continuing, and that kept people away as well. And then 1915, that was it. The Football League said we're going to stop, or the Football Association said we're going to stop playing organised football. And so we had 4 years of playing regional football, and it wasn't classed as first class football. And so again, the crowds throughout that season were quite low because a lot of the men were off fighting, and a lot of them were killed. And which was bad news for Norris and Hull, because they laid out all this money, and bad news for the builder as well. And they were struggling to get through again. And then 1919, football started up again, and the first game of the 1919-20 season was Arsenal against Newcastle, and I think about 50,000 fans managed to get in, and there were thousands and thousands locked out. It almost come to a riot in the streets.
Back in Division 1, which is another
that wasn't it, was it? Was that the image?
That was a bit later. That was 1928, I think, or 1929.
That's 29, isn't it? I think.
Yeah. Not even Arsenal playing. It's the FA Cup semi-final.
Oh, is that the international?
No, it's Portsmouth, I think, playing in the FA Cup semi-final.
You can see the first clock there. Is that the first clock there, isn't it, Andy? That one?
Yeah. So at the bottom left of the screen, there's a little construction there, and that's where. Oh no, sorry, that's where the clock went. That's not actually the clock on there. That didn't come along until 1930.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder how they fit that West Stand in that little space there, doesn't it?
It is,
yeah. I Fergus, just before we move on, I read a lovely quote today, and be interested to get these boys just see what they say. But that first game against Leicester Foss at Highbury, the Arsenal player George Joby was stretchered off, and the Arsenal trainer George Hardy, he had no facilities at all, so he had to put the player on an horse and cart and get him driven back to his digs, his flat where he lived, and actually treat him in his own house. The facilities at Highbury were that poor; there was nothing there for him.
As I said, there was just like a metal frame for the stand, and there was three sides were, nothing, just mud and wood basically.
Yeah, and the other thing from that seat, from the 13-14 season, and I'm looking at your book. This is where I see in your book. I love the fact that you look at the table for that season, and we're in the table as the Arsenal. We are the Arsenal. We are the Arsenal. I wish we still had the Arsenal nowadays. Because it's unique, it's special, and it reflects what our club is. I think I love that.
Yeah, I try to refer to us as the Arsenal wherever possible. I can remember years ago, a mate of mine was a West Ham fan, and was at work, and there was a couple of us were Arsenal fans, and one of us said to the other, "Yeah, you're going up the Arsenal on the weekend." And he's gone, why'd you say the Arsenal? Because we're the Arsenal, mate.
Yeah.
The limited company is the Arsenal Football Club.
Yeah.
The company's house, we registered as the Arsenal.
We say we're going to watch the Arsenal. No other team. You don't say we're going to watch the Manchester United or the Liverpool. It's just them, But Fergus, I know you're conscious of closing this, right? I know you're conscious of closing this, mate. But I just need to. I've been thrown off my track now. You carry on, Fergus. I'll get back to it in a second.
Now, I was just going to say, other teams also refer to us as the Arsenal. If my mates are going to say, you go down the Arsenal today. So, you know, everybody knows us as the Arsenal. Finally, to end on this, at what point did we start getting interested in Herbert Chapman? You talked about the manager who managed us right up to that point. And what was the reason behind us bringing in, looking to approach Chapman? Who wants to go on that? Mark, do you want to go on that? Or?
I think it might be me because I've got the book.
Andy, you've got it.
Okay.
So when Chapman became manager, it's not like today. There were not end-to-end interviews. You know, everyone going to speak to him. Why have you done this? Why have you left so and so? Why have you left the currently the most successful team in the country to go and play for a team that almost got relegated last season? There was just no interviews. We searched and searched and searched. The only bit that we found that around it was Henry Norris refusing to tell a reporter how much Norris was getting paid. But he was getting paid a lot of money. He was getting paid £1,500 a year. So,
Chapman, you mean Chapman?
Sorry?
You mean Chapman?
Chapman, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah,
Chapman was getting paid £1,500 a year. So the players were on a maximum wage of £8 a week, and he's on £30 a week. So that's quite a difference. So what I found is there's a guy called Ivan Sharp, a footballer. He was an amateur, and he played for England in the Olympics. But he played for two teams, which both had a connection with what happened. So the first one was Glossop. Now, Glossop was owned by the Hill-Wood family. They didn't last too long. They went bust. I think they went bust just before the war. But he also played for Leeds City before the war under Herbert Chapman. So he was a friend of Chapman's, and he was also a friend of Samuel Hill-Wood, who went on to become a director at Arsenal and then the chairman at Arsenal. And obviously his son and his grandson also became chairman of Arsenal. So, this is the only thing that I found that alludes to Chapman going to Arsenal, and it wasn't Arsenal approaching him. It was quite the opposite, and it sounds like he'd been thinking about this for quite a while. Okay, so I'll read it word for word. So when Huddersfield Town were halfway through their record-breaking feat of winning the Football League Championship in 3 successive seasons, Chapman, said to me, "There's a change of management coming at Highbury. That's the place for me. You have a friend there, Sir Samuel Hill-Wood. Can you drop a hint?" And what he wanted to do, he says, and this is something he'd said to Sharp before, so this was several years before. He says, "What a chance there is in London. I would like to build a Newcastle United there." Now, what he's talking about is the Newcastle team of the early 20th century, where they won the league 3 times and the FA Cup in sort of like 6 or 7 seasons. So Chapman always wanted to come down to London. Arsenal had just sacked Knighton, and he obviously saw something there, even though Arsenal had finished towards the bottom of the table in 25. And he's asked Ivan Sharp to put in a good word for him, which can only mean that Chapman applied for the job rather than Norris approaching Chapman.
Wow, that's really interesting.
And other than that, we found virtually nothing on this.
Yeah. Fergus, that is a great place. Andy has took us to a great spot there to move into a whole new era in a whole new show, you know, and that is brilliant. But I've got to go back a step because there's one more question, Fergus. Only slightly, right? I know we've overrun slightly, but I just want to watch these faces and I want the reactions. So the last season before the war, we finished 5th in the old 2nd division. 6th. Well, your book's wrong then because it's got us down as 5th.
Is there not a footnote at the bottom of the table?
Oh, yeah. I'll let you off. Hang on a minute. That's another one of you, boys. I'm marking it down. And then after the war...
Where's overrunning for?
After the war, we come back and we're playing 1st division football. What does Norris do? There's so many stories about what Norris does. What strings does he pull, if any?
Okay, so there's this guy called Jimmy Catton. He is like the most well-connected journalist, sports journalist in the world. Okay, everyone knows him. And basically what what happened was that the league the league expanded. So the first division went from 20 to 22 teams, and the second division went from 20 to 22 teams. And what has always happened is when that happens, the two teams that got promoted from the second up to the first obviously stay in the first division because they've earned it. The two teams that got relegated become second division teams, but then the Football League says any team in the second division that wants to be put into an election for them two spaces is eligible. Okay, and now you'd expect all the clubs to do it, but for some reason it never happened. It was always about 5 or 6 teams, and Arsenal said, "Well, we want to be in that vote." And the last time it happened in 1905, one of the teams that asked to be put in the vote finished about 12 or 13th. And in 1919, Nottingham Forest asked to be in the vote, and they finished 17th in the second division. And basically what Norris did was he got Catton, who he knew very well, and we know that he did this because there is a letter in the Arsenal Museum from Norris to Catton asking him, can you put forward our case to the other members of the Football League, explaining and giving reasons why. And one of them was that Arsenal were the first team from the south to join the Football League in 1893, and we'd stayed with the Football League even when the Southern League had been formed, and we could have gone and played in the Southern League, which would have made our journeys around to away games much easier. But we stayed with the Football League. You know, we were loyal to them, and so Norris got Catton to go and do his lobbying of the teams in the North and the Midlands, which were made up by far the majority of the teams in the Football League. And that was it, basically. You know, he used his noddle, whereas Tottenham thought that they were entitled to it, and they just expected it, and they just didn't put in as much effort.
So really, all he did was run a better election campaign than the others.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Don't let anyone tell you about bribery or anything. There is no proof of bribery, and it didn't even get mentioned until 50 years after the event. And it was by a Tottenham supporter who wrote a history book about the Arsenal, and he gave no evidence. It's like me just writing a book now and saying, "Oh, Chelsea bribed their way into the Football League in 1905" with no evidence.
Yeah.
You know, and people just accepting it.
So let's put that one straight, Fergus.
Certain elements of society accept it, but we know better, guys. Really worth overrunning for that. Thank you very much. Love to do something special on Chapman and take it through the eras if you're willing to do it over the summer. It's better than talking about transfers and speculations in the press that nobody knows about. Andy, Mark, just want to say where people can get hold of you, and I have put your website up there, which is thearsenalhistory.com. Please go onto their website if you want to get any more details. There's everything on there, honestly. And as Trevor said, don't click in there if you're rushing out with your missus or something like that, because you're going to get in trouble. You're going to be stuck on there for a little while. So, Andy, do you want to tell everyone where they can find you?
As Fergus said, www.thearsenalhistory.com, and also thearsenalcollection.org.uk, or on Twitter, as it says there, at Guna_AK.
I'm at Royal Arsenal MRA.
Brilliant.
Royal Arsenal MRA. I love that. Royal Arsenal MRA. But just remember, we got to, I know I jumped back a bit, but we got to where Chapman has really interviewed himself or shoehorned himself in for an interview for the Arsenal job. Hold that thought, to be continued. It excites me. It excites me. I want to know more about Mr. Chapman. I'm going to go and read about it now till next time.
Right. You have been watching an Arsenal podcast by Arsenal fans, for Arsenal fans, listening to the history the way it was, not the way it was made up by the boys on the arsenalhistory.com website. If you like what we do, click subscribe, tell your mates about it. Thanks very much.
You've been listening to Guns and Yellow Ribbons, an Arsenal podcast by Arsenal fans, for Arsenal fans. Follow us on Facebook at Guns and Yellow Ribbons and Twitter at Guns and Ribbons. And remember to rate and review us too.